My parents bought my sister a luxury villa, but handed me the bill. We decided you're paying this mortgage. I refused, and they sued me for $650,000. Then the judge stepped in. I am Clara. I am 32 years old. If you had asked me a year ago to describe my life, I would have told you I was just a boring, mildly successful financial analyst living a quiet, predictable life in Boston. I had a routine. I woke up early, took the train, worked hard, and came home to my modest one-bedroom apartment. I liked my quiet life. I built it from the ground up, penny by penny, because I knew early on that no one was going to hand me anything. It was a freezing Tuesday evening in November when my entire reality collapsed. I remember the wind whipping off the harbor as I walked from the subway station to my building. I was exhausted. My brain was fried from staring at spreadsheets all day, and all I wanted was a hot shower and some leftover takeout. I stopped by the mailroom in my lobby, expecting the usual junk mail, a utility bill, maybe a catalog I never asked for. Instead, wedged in my tiny mailbox, was a thick, heavy envelope from the Massachusetts Bay Mortgage Company. I stood there in the lobby, frowning at it. The envelope was addressed to me. Clara. My full legal name. I had never done business with this bank in my life. My first thought was that it was just some incredibly aggressive marketing tactic. You know how those credit card companies send you fake checks to get your attention? I assumed it was something like that. But the envelope felt too substantial. It felt official. I took the elevator up to my floor, unlocked my door, dropped my bags on the kitchen counter, and tore the envelope open. Inside was a massive stack of legal documents. My eyes scanned the first page, and my heart physically skipped a beat. It was a finalized mortgage agreement. My name was typed clearly at the top as the sole borrower. The property address was listed as a luxury villa in Winchester, Massachusetts. Winchester is an incredibly affluent, expensive suburb about 20 minutes outside of Boston. I had never even driven through the neighborhood, let alone looked at real estate there. Then I saw the numbers. The loan amount was $650,000. The monthly payment was calculated at $4,200 for a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage. I literally stopped breathing. The air left my lungs. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck, and the edges of my vision started to blur. I had to grip the edge of the granite counter just to keep my legs from giving out. I flipped frantically through the pages. There, at the bottom of several pages, was my signature. Or at least, something that looked terrifyingly close to my signature. I was having an out-of-body experience. I had never applied for this loan. I did not own a house. I certainly did not owe a bank over $500,000. I ran to my living room, grabbed my phone, and dialed the customer service number listed on the letterhead. My hands were shaking so violently I kept hitting the wrong numbers. When the call finally connected, I was greeted by an automated voice telling me that regular business hours had ended at 5 o'clock. I hung up and threw my phone onto the couch. I felt entirely completely sick. Who did this? How did someone get my social security number, my employment history, my tax returns, and forge my signature to buy a luxury villa? Identity theft happens, sure. You hear about someone buying a flat-screen TV on a stolen credit card. But a $650,000 mortgage? The sheer scale of the fraud was paralyzing. I spent that entire night sitting on my kitchen floor, staring at those papers, completely unable to sleep, feeling like the secure, independent life I had built was being ripped out from under me. As I sat there in the dark, my mind raced through every person who could possibly have access to my sensitive information. And as much as I tried to push the thought away, a dark, heavy realization started to settle in the pit of my stomach. To understand why my mind went straight to my own family, you have to understand the toxic environment I grew up in. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Connecticut. My parents, George and Diana, were masters of creating a two-tiered system within our home. There was me, the eldest daughter, the workhorse, the one expected to fix everything. And then there was Brittany, my sister, who is 4 years younger than me. Brittany was the golden child. The differences were never spoken out loud, but they were woven into the very fabric of our lives. From a young age, I suffered from severe eldest daughter syndrome. If I got a B on a test, my father would sit me down for a stern lecture about my future. If Brittany got a C, my mother would bake her a cake for passing. When I turned 16, I was told I needed to get an after-school job if I wanted to buy clothes or go out with my friends. I worked shifts at a local diner, smelling like stale grease, just to afford my own winter coat. When Brittany turned 16, a brand new car magically appeared in the driveway, fully paid for, with gas and insurance covered by my parents. But the real division happened when it was time for college. I knew my parents were not wealthy, so I worked relentlessly to get partial scholarships. For the rest of my tuition, I took out heavy student loans. I spent my 4 years in Boston working 3 different part-time jobs. I practically lived in the campus library. I ate ramen noodles, wore thrift store clothes, and counted every single penny just to survive. My parents contributed absolutely nothing to my education. They told me it built character. Meanwhile, Brittany went to 3 different expensive, private art programs. She dropped out of every single one of them. She would get bored, or say the professors didn't understand her creative vision. George and Diana paid her full tuition every single time. They paid her rent in expensive downtown apartments. They even funded a 2-month backpacking trip across Europe for her to, quote, find herself, unquote. While I was pulling all-nighters to study for finance exams and crying over my loan balances, my sister was posting photos from a yacht in Greece, entirely funded by the people who told me they couldn't spare $50 for my textbooks. Over the years, I became their personal ATM. Whenever Brittany messed up, I was expected to step in. If her car broke down, my mother would call me, crying, saying I was the successful one and I needed to help my poor sister pay the mechanic. I was conditioned to believe that setting boundaries was selfish. They trained me to feel guilty for having money, guilty for having a stable career, while Brittany played the eternal victim. As the sun started to rise over Boston, casting a gray light into my apartment, I looked down at the forged signature on the mortgage document. My mother always handled the family taxes. She had copies of my old returns from when I lived at home. She knew my social security number by heart. The sick feeling in my stomach turned into cold, hard dread. At 8 o'clock the next morning, I called the bank's fraud department. I was put on hold for what felt like a lifetime. The upbeat acoustic hold music playing on a loop felt like a psychological torture device, while my entire financial future hung in the balance. When a representative finally answered, her voice was completely detached. I frantically explained that I did not buy a house in Winchester and that someone had stolen my identity. She coldly informed me that because the loan had already closed and the funds were dispersed, this was no longer a simple cancellation. She told me I needed to file a formal police report and provide an affidavit of forgery before they would even open an investigation. Furthermore, she warned me that until the investigation concluded, which could take months, the mortgage remained in my name. If a payment was missed, my credit score would tank. I hung up the phone, feeling like I was suffocating. I needed to go to the police station. I needed to call a lawyer. But before I could even take a breath, my cell phone rang. It was my mother, Diana. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding against my ribs. I answered it, putting it on speakerphone. "Hi, honey," her voice chirped through the speaker, sounding entirely too casual. "Did you get the house papers in the mail yet?" The world stopped spinning. The silence in my apartment was deafening. She didn't sound guilty. She didn't sound nervous. She asked about a $650,000 fraudulent mortgage the same way someone asks if you received a birthday card. "Mom," my voice was barely a whisper, trembling with a mixture of terror and rage. "What is going on? Did you do this? Did you buy a house in my name?" "Oh, stop being so dramatic, Clara," she sighed, sounding annoyed. "Your father and I have it all figured out. We just need to sit down and talk. Come over for dinner tonight. Brittany will be here too. We can discuss the payment schedule." Payment schedule. The words hit me like a physical blow. "I am not coming to dinner," I yelled, my voice cracking. "This is identity theft. You forged my signature. Clara, lower your voice, she snapped, instantly switching to her authoritative, manipulating tone. It is a family matter. We are not doing this over the phone. Be here at 6. Then, she hung up. I stood there, staring at the blank screen of my phone. I couldn't go to the office. I emailed my boss, claiming a family emergency, which was the understatement of the century, and took the day off. I spent the entire afternoon pacing my apartment, trying to make sense of the insane reality I had just woken up in. By 4 o'clock, I realized I could not avoid this. I needed to hear them say it. I needed to know exactly what they had done. The drive to Connecticut took 2 hours. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The highway blurred past me as I rehearsed every single thing I was going to say. I felt like I was driving toward a battlefield, not my childhood home. When I pulled into my parents' driveway, I saw Brittany's car parked near the garage. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the violent shaking in my hands, and walked through the front door. The scene in the living room was bizarre. It felt like walking into a corporate boardroom meeting. My father, George, was sitting in his leather recliner, looking stern and authoritative. My mother was sitting on the sofa, holding a cup of tea. Brittany was lounging next to her, scrolling through her phone, looking completely unbothered. Nobody stood up to hug me. Nobody said hello. Sit down, Clara, my father commanded, pointing to a hard wooden chair across from them. I didn't sit. I stayed standing, clutching my purse. Explain this. Right now. George sighed heavily, as if dealing with a difficult employee. As you know, Brittany has been struggling. Her credit score isn't where it needs to be, and she doesn't have steady employment right now. But she needs a stable place to live. Your mother and I found the perfect villa in Winchester. It has a pool, great natural light for her art, and it's in a safe neighborhood. And? I demanded, my blood boiling. And my mother chimed in smoothly, the bank wouldn't approve a loan for her. And since your father and I are retired, we couldn't qualify for the full amount either. So, we used our life savings, about $150,000, for the down payment. But we needed someone with excellent credit and a high salary to be the primary borrower. So we used your information. I stared at them, completely stunned by their audacity. You stole my identity. You forged my signature on legal documents. We did not steal anything, my father boomed, his face turning red. We acted on your behalf. You are doing extremely well at your firm. You just got a promotion. We decided that you are going to pay this mortgage. Think of it as an investment in your sister's future. Brittany finally looked up from her phone, a smug, entitled smirk on her face. Yeah, Clara. You have a great job. I literally have nothing. It won't kill you to help me out. Plus, the house is gorgeous. You can come visit on weekends if you want. I felt something snap inside my brain. Years of biting my tongue, years of playing the good, quiet, helpful daughter just completely shattered. Are you insane? I screamed, the sound echoing off the walls. I am not paying a single dime. I cannot afford $4,200 a month. Even if I could, I wouldn't do it. What you did is federal wire fraud. It is a felony. Don't you dare use that tone in this house. My father stood up, towering over me. We raised you. We put a roof over your head. This family takes care of its own. If you walk away from this, if you ruin this for your sister, I will disown you. You will have no family left. My mother started crying, her classic manipulation tactic. How can you be so selfish, Clara? We used our entire retirement savings for the down payment. If you don't make the monthly payments, the bank will take the house, and we will lose everything. Then you shouldn't have committed a crime, I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm, cold whisper. I am going to the police tomorrow. I am reporting this to the fraud department. I turned around and walked toward the door. If you walk out that door, you are dead to us, my mother shrieked from the living room. I didn't look back. I opened the front door, walked out into the freezing night air, and drove away. My phone started ringing immediately, but I turned it completely off. I drove all the way back to Boston in silence. I realized in that car ride that I didn't have a family anymore. I had parasites who were willing to destroy my life so my sister could live in luxury. Before we continue with the rest of Clara's incredible story, please take a quick second to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below telling us what city you are watching from. Every single comment helps the video reach more people, and we truly appreciate your support. Now, let's get back to the story. The next morning, I woke up feeling completely hollowed out. The adrenaline from the confrontation had faded, leaving behind a crushing wave of anxiety. I turned my phone back on and was immediately hit with a flood of notifications. 47 missed calls. A voicemail box completely full of my father shouting and my mother crying. I ignored all of them. I went to work because I needed the distraction, but I was a zombie. During my lunch break, I pulled my colleague, Allison, into an empty conference room. Allison is one of those fiercely protective people who knows a little bit about everything. When I told her what my parents had done, her jaw literally dropped. "Clara, you need a shark. Not just a regular lawyer. You need a litigator who specializes in financial fraud," she told me, immediately pulling out her phone and searching through her contacts. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, I was sitting in the sleek, intimidating downtown office of Harrison Grant. Harrison was a no-nonsense attorney in his 50s who listened to my story with a totally blank expression. He didn't gasp. He didn't offer fake sympathy. He just took notes. "The good news is that you are the victim of a clear-cut crime," Harrison said, adjusting his glasses. "The bad news is that the burden of proof is currently on you, and the system moves incredibly slowly. Your credit score is going to take a massive hit while we fight this. We need to go on the offensive." He drafted a formal, terrifyingly legal letter to my parents, sending it via certified mail. It stated unequivocally that I did not authorize the purchase, I would not accept the debt, and I demanded they immediately find a way to remove my name from the mortgage, or I would press criminal charges. Leaving his office, the reality of the bureaucratic nightmare set in. I had to go to the local police precinct and sit in a hard plastic chair for 3 hours just to file an identity theft report with an officer who looked bored out of his mind. I had to call all 3 major credit bureaus to place hard freezes on my social security number. I had to fill out endless forms, fax documents, and write detailed timelines. It was exhausting. It felt like a full-time job just trying to prove that my own flesh and blood were thieves. I went to bed that night feeling a tiny sliver of control, hoping the certified letter from a high-powered lawyer would scare my parents into backing down. I was so incredibly wrong. The certified letter didn't scare them. It ignited a war. My parents realized I wasn't going to roll over and be the obedient ATM anymore, so they changed their tactics. If they couldn't control my finances privately, they were going to destroy my reputation publicly. It started with my sister, Brittany. She launched a vicious, calculated smear campaign on social media. She posted a long, tearful video talking about how her big sister had promised to buy her a house as a gift to help her get back on her feet, but then backed out at the last minute out of pure spite and jealousy. She cried on camera, talking about how she was going to be homeless because I was a greedy, heartless corporate monster. I didn't even have social media, but Allison showed me the video. It had hundreds of comments from people calling me awful names. But the worst part was the extended family. My inbox and voicemail were suddenly flooded with messages from aunts, uncles, and cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. They became my parents' flying monkeys. My Aunt Susan left a voicemail calling me a disgrace. A cousin texted me saying, "How can you sleep at night knowing your sister is crying? Family is everything, Clara. You have money, just pay for the house." None of them knew the truth about the forgery. They only knew the twisted narrative my parents had fed them. Then, my mother escalated things. On a Tuesday afternoon, my desk phone rang. It was the receptionist down in the main lobby of my office building. She sounded panicked. "Clara, your mother is down here. She is screaming at people and demanding to see you." I rushed down to the lobby to find Diana standing near the elevators, crying hysterically, telling anyone who would listen that her daughter was throwing her out on the street. I was mortified. My face burned with humiliation as my coworkers stared. I had to ask the building security guards to physically escort my own mother out of the building. But my father took the final, most vindictive step. He managed to guess the email format for my company and sent a direct email to my division manager. The email claimed that I was suffering from a severe mental breakdown, that I was having paranoid delusions, and that I was unstable. Thank God my boss knew me well and recognized it as a crazy family dispute, but the sheer malice of the act left me breathless. They weren't just trying to manipulate me anymore. They were actively trying to get me fired. They wanted me destitute so I would be forced to crawl back to them. By the second month of this nightmare, my physical health began to fail. The stress was eating me alive from the inside out. I stopped eating because my stomach was tied in permanent knots. I lost 15 pounds. I started finding clumps of my hair in the shower drain every morning. The worst were the panic attacks. I would wake up at 3 in the morning, gasping for air, clutching my chest because my heart was beating so fast I genuinely thought I was having a heart attack. I felt completely isolated. The family I spent 32 years trying to please was hunting me like prey. I thought things couldn't possibly get any darker. I assumed we were just in a standoff. I was refusing to pay. The bank was conducting their slow investigation, and I was just trying to survive the daily harassment. Then came a rainy Thursday evening. I was at home, wearing sweatpants, trying to force myself to eat a bowl of soup, when there was a loud, sharp knock at my door. I looked through the peephole and saw a man in a plain windbreaker holding a manila envelope. I opened the door cautiously. "Clara?" he asked. "Yes," I replied, confused. He shoved the envelope into my chest. "You've been served." He turned around and walked down the hallway without another word. My hands trembled as I tore open the envelope. I pulled out a thick stack of legal documents printed on heavy court paper. I read the header. It was a civil lawsuit filed in the county court. The plaintiffs were George and Diana. The defendant was me. I skimmed through the legal jargon, my eyes widening in absolute horror. They were suing me. My own parents were taking me to court. They were demanding $650,000 in damages. Their lawyer had drafted an insane complaint claiming breach of a verbal family contract. The document alleged that I had made a firm, verbal commitment to purchase the villa for my sister, that my parents had acted as my authorized agents in good faith to secure the property, and that my sudden refusal to pay was an act of extreme emotional distress and financial sabotage against them. It was pure fiction. It was legally flimsy, absurd, and completely fabricated. But it didn't matter that it was a lie. What mattered was that a judge had accepted the filing. What mattered was that I was now the defendant in a massive civil lawsuit, and if I didn't respond formally, they could win a default judgment against me. I sank down onto the floor of my apartment, surrounded by the scattered court papers. I felt a cold, dark wave of despair wash over me. They were using the legal system as a weapon to force my compliance. They knew I didn't have the endless funds to fight a drawn-out court battle. They were trying to bleed me dry until I gave up and accepted the mortgage. I sat there crying, realizing that the people who were supposed to protect me were the ones I needed protection from the most. The morning after I was officially served with the lawsuit papers, I walked into Harrison Grant's office feeling like a hollow shell of a human being. I hadn't slept for a single second. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those blue-backed legal documents dancing in the dark, accusing me of things I never did. I placed the thick manila envelope on Harrison's mahogany desk with a hand that wouldn't stop trembling. Harrison didn't look up immediately. He was a man who moved with the deliberate, slow precision of a veteran litigator. When he finally opened the envelope and skimmed through the 37 pages of absolute fiction my parents had filed against me, his expression shifted from professional neutrality to a cold, hard grimace. He leaned back in his leather chair, the springs creaking in the quiet office. "They are going for blood, Clara," he said, his voice low. "This isn't just a lawsuit. This is an attempt to bury you under so much legal debris that you'll have no choice but to climb out by paying for that house." He spent the next hour explaining the brutal reality of the American legal system. Being innocent, he told me, was merely a starting point. It wasn't a shield. To prove that I never signed those documents, We would have to go through a process called discovery. We would need handwriting experts to verify the forgery. We would need to take depositions, sworn statements, from my parents, my sister, and the mortgage officers. Every hour he spent on the phone, every document he drafted, every minute he sat in a courtroom would cost me $350. Then came the hammer blow. I need a $15,000 retainer up front, Clara. And to be honest, that might only cover the first 3 months if they decide to play dirty. $15,000. To a lot of people, that sounds like a fortune. To me, it represented 5 years of skipped vacations, 5 years of choosing the bus over an Uber, 5 years of working Saturday shifts at the firm just to build a safety net. I went home that night and sat on my kitchen floor, the linoleum cold against my legs. I opened my laptop and logged into my Vanguard brokerage account. My eyes blurred as I looked at the balance. It was exactly $18,422. My entire life's savings, excluding my retirement. I sat there for 2 hours, paralyzed. If I paid Harrison, I'd have almost nothing left. If a pipe burst in my apartment or I lost my job, I'd be destitute. But if I didn't pay him, my parents would win a default judgment, and I'd be on the hook for $650,000. They were holding my future hostage. With a heavy, leaden heart, I clicked the buttons to liquidate my holdings. I watched the sell orders process one by one. Each click felt like a stab. I was selling my security to buy a chance at justice. For the next few weeks, my life became a series of grim sacrifices. I canceled my high-speed internet and used the free Wi-Fi from the cafe downstairs. I stopped buying fresh produce and switched to bulk bags of rice and frozen beans. I even stopped using my heater, wearing 3 layers of sweaters in my own home to keep the utility bill under $50. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. Then, the psychological warfare began. Theodore Black, the silver-haired shark my parents hired, sent Harrison a settlement proposal. I remember reading it in the break room at work, my hands shaking so hard I spilled my lukewarm coffee. The proposal was a masterpiece of manipulation. It stated that if I agreed to pay the mortgage for just 60 months, 5 years, my parents would drop the lawsuit and forgive me for the public embarrassment I had caused them. They even had the audacity to suggest that after 5 years, if Brittany had found her footing, they would try to refinance. It was a trap disguised as an olive branch. They knew I was bleeding money. They knew I was exhausted. They were betting that I would pay $30,000 a year in mortgage payments just to make the nightmare go away. I called Harrison immediately. "I won't do it," I told him, my voice cracking with a mixture of rage and exhaustion. "I don't care if I have to live on bread and water for the next decade. I am not rewarding them for stealing my life. Tell them the answer is no. Tell them I'll see them in front of a judge." Rejecting that settlement was the hardest thing I've ever done, because it meant the war was officially going to continue. The guilt started to eat at me like acid. I would lie awake wondering if I was the monster they said I was. Was I really going to let my parents go bankrupt over a house? Was I being too rigid? This is where I realized I couldn't survive this alone. I found Dr. Evelyn Carter, a psychologist who specialized in what she called high-conflict family systems. In our first session, I couldn't even speak. I just sat on her velvet sofa and sobbed for 20 minutes. Dr. Carter didn't rush me. She just sat there with a box of tissues and a calm, steady presence. When I finally found my voice, I told her about the luxury villa, the forged signatures, and the way my mother cried on the phone. "Clara," she said gently, "you're experiencing a profound type of grief. You aren't just losing your parents. You are losing the version of them you needed to believe in to feel safe. You are mourning a mother and father who never actually existed." She explained that my parents were using a tactic called FOG, fear, obligation, and guilt. They had raised me to be a parentified child, someone whose only value was based on what I could do for them. She helped me see that Brittany wasn't just the favorite, she was the tool they used to keep me in line. If I was busy taking care of Brittany, I wouldn't have time to realize how much my parents were taking from me. Then came the revelation that changed my entire perspective. About 5 months into the lawsuit, I got an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was, "The Wilson Family Secret." It was from my Uncle Gregory, my father's brother. I hadn't seen him since I was 10 years old. My father always told me Gregory was a deadbeat and a traitor who had abandoned the family. The email was 3,000 words long. Gregory told me the truth. In the early 1990s, my grandfather had done the exact same thing to him. My grandfather and my father, George, had convinced Gregory to use his veterans' benefits to secure a massive commercial loan for a family business. As soon as the money hit the account, George and my grandfather siphoned it off into private accounts, defaulted on the loan, and left Gregory to face the banks alone. Gregory lost his house, his credit, and his first marriage because of the financial ruin. "They didn't hate me, Clara," Gregory wrote. "They just didn't see me as a person. They saw me as an asset to be liquidated. They're doing it to you now because you're the only asset they have left. Break the cycle. Don't let them do to you what they did to me." I sat in my dark living room, reading that email over and over. A massive weight lifted off my chest. For 32 years, I thought the dysfunction was my fault. I thought if I was just a little more successful or a little more helpful, they would finally love me the way they loved Brittany. But now I saw the truth. It was a cycle. My father had watched his own father steal from his brother, and instead of being horrified, he had taken notes. He had learned that family was just a shield you hide behind while you pick someone's pockets. I took that email to Dr. Carter, and we spent weeks deconstructing it. She helped me build what she called an internal fortress. We practiced how to handle the flying monkeys, the aunts and cousins who kept calling me to shame me. She taught me that no is a complete sentence. By the time we were ready for the court hearing, I wasn't a shivering victim anymore. I was a woman who had seen the monster behind the curtain, and I wasn't afraid of it anymore. The day of the hearing was gray and miserable, matching the mood of the last year of my life. I met Harrison Grant in front of the county courthouse at 8:30 in the morning. He looked as sharp as a razor in a charcoal suit, clutching a briefcase that contained the evidence that would either save me or ruin me. "Remember," Harrison whispered as we walked through the metal detectors, "Judge Sylvia Thornton is a legend for her intolerance of games. She spent 10 years in the crimes division. She knows a liar when she sees one. Keep your face like stone. Do not look at them." But I couldn't help it. As we walked into courtroom 4B, I saw them. My parents and Brittany were already seated at the plaintiff's table. They looked like they had stepped out of a church brochure. My mother, Diana, was wearing a modest navy dress and a string of pearls, her face carefully made up to look pale and exhausted. My father, George, sat rigidly with his chin up, the picture of a wronged patriarch. Brittany was tucked between them, looking small and fragile in a cream-colored cardigan. Their lawyer, Theodore Black, was leaning over them, whispering and nodding. He looked like he had already won. He looked at me with a smirk that made my skin crawl. When Judge Thornton entered the room, the atmosphere changed instantly. She was a formidable woman with graying hair pulled back into a tight bun. She didn't smile. She didn't look at the gallery. She just opened the thick file on her desk and adjusted her glasses. "We are here on the defendant's motion to dismiss," she began, her voice a deep, resonant alto that commanded absolute silence. "I have reviewed the complaint filed by Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, and I have reviewed the extensive discovery provided by the defense. Counselor Black, you may begin." Theodore Black stood up with a flourish, buttoning his expensive suit jacket. He started speaking about the sacred bond of family. He used words like filial piety and implied contractual obligations. He painted a picture of me as a cold, calculating daughter who had used my parents' guidance to reach the top of the financial world, only to turn my back on them when my struggling sister needed a place to call home. "My clients acted in good faith, Your Honor," Black said, his voice dripping with fake emotion. "They acted as agents for their daughter, who had verbally committed to providing for her sister. They used their own life savings for a down payment, trusting that the defendant would honor her word. Instead, she has chosen to weaponize the legal system against the very people who gave her life." I felt the urge to scream, to jump up and tell the judge about the ramen noodles and the 3 jobs and the backpacking trips I never got to take. But I felt Harrison's hand on my arm, firm and steady. He squeezed once. Wait, he was telling me. Just wait. When it was Harrison's turn, he didn't use flowery language. He didn't talk about sacred bonds. He talked about numbers, dates, and the law. Your Honor, Harrison said, standing tall. This isn't a case about a family disagreement. This is a case about felony fraud. My client never made a verbal agreement because she wasn't even aware this house existed until she received a bill for $650,000. He then called my father to the stand. George walked up with a confident stride, looking like he was about to give a lecture. But as soon as he took the oath, Harrison began the interrogation. Mr. Wilson, you claim there was a verbal agreement. On what date did this conversation take place? My father hesitated. It was over many months. We discussed Brittany's needs constantly. I'm asking for a specific date, Mr. Wilson. When did Clara say the words, I will pay for a $650,000 mortgage? She didn't have to say those exact words. George snapped, his temper starting to flare. She knew her responsibilities. So, there was no specific conversation? Harrison pushed. And yet, you felt comfortable signing her name to a 30-year legal contract? You felt comfortable committing her to a payment of $4,200 a month without a single signed document from her. We are her parents. George shouted, his face turning that familiar shade of angry purple. We know what's best for her. Judge Thornton leaned forward, her eyes narrowing behind her glasses. Mr. Wilson, answer the question. Did you have written power of attorney to sign for your daughter? No, Your Honor, George muttered, suddenly looking much smaller. Next, Harrison called Brittany. She tried to play the victim, crying softly into a tissue. She talked about her artistic soul and how she just wanted a stable place to paint. Miss Wilson, Harrison said, holding up a stack of glossy papers. I have here your Instagram posts from the last 6 months. While you were claiming to be a destitute artist in need of a $650,000 villa, you were posting photos from a 5-star resort in Cabo San Lucas. You were posting photos of a new $5,000 designer handbag. Where did that money come from? Brittany stammered, looking at my mother for help. Those were gifts. My parents gave them to me. The same parents who claim they have no money and need their other daughter to pay their debts? Harrison asked. It seems, Miss Wilson, that the only person struggling in this family is my client, who is currently paying for your luxury lifestyle while being sued for the privilege. I looked at Brittany. For the first time in my life, I didn't see a golden child. I saw a middle-aged woman in a 28-year-old's body, someone who had been stunted by my parents' toxic enabling. She looked pathetic. The final blow came when Harrison requested to play an audio recording. Theodore Black jumped up to object, but Judge Thornton overruled him. This is a recording of a voicemail left by the plaintiff, Diana Wilson, on the defendant's phone 3 days after the mortgage was finalized, Harrison explained. The courtroom speakers crackled to life. My mother's voice filled the room, but it wasn't the sweet, crying voice she had been using all morning. It was sharp, cold, and calculating. Clara, don't you dare call the bank, the recording played. I don't care if you're upset. We used your credit because you owe us for everything we've done for you. We already have the keys. If you try to fight this, we will tell everyone you've had a mental breakdown. We will ruin your career. Just shut up and pay the bill like a good daughter. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother put her head on the table and started to wail, real tears this time, but they weren't for me. They were for herself. Judge Thornton didn't wait for closing arguments. She closed the file with a sharp thud that echoed like a gavel. I have seen enough of this masquerade, the judge said, her voice trembling with a controlled, righteous fury. Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, you have not brought a lawsuit into my court. You have brought a confession of criminal activity. You have admitted to forgery, identity theft, and a coordinated campaign of harassment against your own child. She looked at me, and for a split second, her expression softened into something resembling pity. The motion to dismiss is granted with prejudice. This case is over. Furthermore, I am awarding the defendant full legal fees and sanctions in the amount of $20,000 to be paid by the plaintiffs. And let me be clear, she turned her gaze back to my parents. I am making a formal referral to the district attorney for a criminal investigation into mortgage fraud. I suggest you find a very different kind of lawyer for what comes next. We are adjourned. I didn't move. I sat there as the room cleared, as my parents were ushered out by a grim-looking Theodore Black, as Brittany stomped her foot in a silent tantrum. Harrison turned to me and put a hand on my shoulder. "You did it, Clara," he said. "It's finally over." I looked at him and realized I was crying. But they weren't the tears of a victim. They were the tears of a woman who had finally stepped out of the fog and into the light. The destruction of my parents' world happened with a speed that was almost dizzying. Once the judge's ruling was made public, the bank's fraud department didn't need any more evidence. They moved with the cold efficiency of a giant machine. Within 48 hours, the $650,000 mortgage was stripped from my name. My credit report was wiped clean of the inquiries, and my score began to climb back toward the 800 mark where it belonged. But for my parents, the done deal they had bragged about turned into a financial black hole. Because the loan was fraudulent, the bank moved to rescind the entire contract. They initiated an immediate foreclosure on the luxury villa in Winchester. My parents tried to fight it, but they had no legs to stand on. Because they had admitted to fraud in a court of law, the bank exercised a clause that allowed them to keep the entire $150,000 down payment as a penalty. In 1 week, George and Diana lost their entire life savings. They lost the dream home for Brittany. And, because of the $20,000 in legal sanctions they owed me, their bank accounts were frozen. They had to sell their own house in Connecticut just to pay their debts and find a tiny, 2-bedroom apartment in a run-down part of town. Brittany's life collapsed the hardest. She had moved into that villa like a queen, posting photos of the marble countertops and the infinity pool. When the sheriff arrived with the eviction notice, she refused to leave. She had to be physically escorted off the property, screaming that I was robbing her. She moved back into my parents' new, cramped apartment, sleeping on a twin bed in a room that smelled like damp carpet. The flying monkeys vanished just as quickly as they had appeared. When the local news picked up the story with the headline, "Parents sued for forging daughter's name on luxury mortgage," the aunts and uncles who had called me a disgrace suddenly stopped calling altogether. A few tried to send me thinking of you cards, but I returned them to sender unopened. I didn't need their late-coming sympathy. The district attorney did eventually open an investigation. Because of their age and lack of prior criminal records, my parents weren't sent to prison, but they were placed on 5 years of strict probation and ordered to perform 500 hours of community service. My father, the proud patriarch, spent his weekends picking up trash on the side of the highway in an orange vest. It was the only work he had done in years. It has been exactly 1 year since the judge banged her gavel and set me free. If you saw me today, you might not recognize the woman who was shivering on her kitchen floor 12 months ago. I didn't just survive the lawsuit, I thrived because of it. The $20,000 in sanctions my parents were forced to pay me helped replenish the savings I had lost. But the real gain was professional. My boss at the firm was so impressed by the way I handled the crisis with poise and ironclad logic that he promoted me to Senior Vice President of Risk Management. My salary nearly doubled. 6 months ago, I finally did what I had dreamed of doing since I moved to Boston. I bought my own home. It's not a $650,000 villa in Winchester. It's a beautiful, sun-drenched condo in a historic building with brick walls and a view of the park. When I signed the closing papers, I used my own pen, my own name, and my own hard-earned money. I sat in the empty living room on the first night and just listened to the silence. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I'm still in therapy with Dr. Carter. We don't talk about the lawsuit much anymore. We talk about the future. We talk about how to build a chosen family. I've reconnected with Uncle Gregory, and he's become the father figure I never had. He comes up to Boston once a month, and we go to baseball games or try new restaurants. He told me he's proud of me, and for the first time in my life, I actually believe someone when they say that. I also started an anonymous blog called The Debt of Blood, where I share resources for young people facing financial abuse from their parents. I've helped over 100 people set up credit freezes and find pro bono lawyers. Every time I get an email from someone saying, "Because of your story, I said no," I feel a piece of my own soul healing. I haven't spoken to George, Diana, or Brittany since the day in court. I heard through a distant cousin that my mother still tells people I stole their retirement money, but it doesn't hurt me anymore. Her lies are just noise now, like static on a radio I've turned off. I realized that the family I was so afraid of losing was never really there. They were just a shadow I was chasing. By letting that shadow go, I finally found the person I was always meant to be. I am Clara. I am 33. I am independent, I am debt-free, and for the first time in my life, I am truly home. So, looking back at the ashes of what used to be my family, a part of me still wonders. Am I wrong for letting them face bankruptcy and homelessness instead of throwing them a lifeline? Should I have tried to find a compromise, or was walking away and letting the legal system crush them the only way to break the curse? I want to know what you guys think. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories about navigating complex family dynamics. Remember, protecting your financial well-being isn't selfish, it's essential self-care. Take care and see you in the next story.